Story 1. I had just finished a long shift, hauling freight across I-76 in Denver, heading west toward my next drop. It was late afternoon, the sun starting to dip, casting everything in a golden-orange haze. I'd been on the road for a while, so I was in that groove, just cruising along, the miles slipping by without much thought. My truck was steady, humming along at 70 miles per hour, and I felt like I was in my element. There's something meditative about the open road. The weather had been clear, no storms on the radar, and the traffic was light. But then, out of nowhere, things changed. It came at me so fast that it almost felt like I was part of some bad dream. I don't know what exactly I was expecting, but I wasn't ready for what I saw. It was a massive, almost solid cloud of what looked like dirt. Huge, at least 20 feet wide and 10 feet tall. It wasn't some little dust cloud from a passing truck or a windy day. No, this was something else entirely, and it was headed straight for me. I scanned ahead, trying to figure out where the hell it could have come from, but there was nothing in front of me. No vehicles, no trailers, no dust kicked up by tires, just this wall of dirt. My heart started to race. I couldn't go around it, couldn't speed up to avoid it. There was no shoulder on the highway, no escape route. The thought of slamming the brakes crossed my mind, but I couldn't risk it at 70 miles per hour. All I could do was slow down, praying it wouldn't be worse than it seemed. The seconds felt like hours. I braced myself for impact, gripping the wheel tighter, trying to steady my breathing. I wasn't sure what to expect, but what happened next was worse than I could have imagined. The truck shook as the cloud hit me. The force of it rattled the frame, and the sound was like a thunderclap, loud and deep. My windshield shattered with the impact, not in one clean break, but a spray of cracks spreading out like a spider's web. At first, I couldn't see a damn thing. Everything was covered in this thick, sticky mess. It was like hitting a brick wall at full speed, except it wasn't bricks. It was something far worse. I hit the windshield wipers, but it didn't help. My heart was pounding in my ears as I struggled to make sense of the chaos. Through the blur, I could see streaks of red and something darker, something that wasn't just dirt. No, this was something organic, something that shouldn't be there. The smell hit me next, sharp and metallic, making my stomach turn. I could barely breathe through it, the stench of blood, of raw meat, mixed with the dust and grime. I knew something was wrong. That wasn't dirt. I couldn't put my finger on it, but the way it clung to the glass, the way it splattered against my truck, this wasn't just a freak accident. I wiped at the windshield with the washer fluid, but it didn't clear anything. If anything, it made it worse. The blood, the pieces, they were smeared, stretched across the glass, each movement making it worse. I squinted through the mess, trying to focus. What was that? I thought I saw something moving in the cloud, like a shadow shifting within the wreckage, a shape that didn't belong. I slammed the wipers again, harder this time, praying that I could see. But when it cleared, I wished it hadn't. It was a thing. At first, I thought it was just a smear, a trick of the light. But no, it was a grotesque shape, twisted and unnatural. I couldn't describe it properly, not with the blood and grime smeared all over the glass. But there was something in there, something that didn't belong, something too large and too wrong. It was like I had hit a body or parts of one, but the way it had hit, it wasn't right. It didn't feel like a normal accident. It felt deliberate. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands trembling on the wheel. I needed to get out, but I couldn't bring myself to. The thought of seeing whatever the hell that was, that thing that I almost hit, made my stomach drop. I didn't want to get out, but I knew I had to. If I didn't, I couldn't just pretend this hadn't happened. I stepped out of the truck, my boots scraping against the pavement. The air was still thick with that awful smell, and I gagged, trying to cover my nose with my sleeve. But it wasn't the smell that hit me hardest. It was the silence. It was so quiet out there, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the only one left in the world. I walked around to the front of my truck, and when I saw it, I froze. There was no mistaking it now. There were chunks of something on the hood, skin, muscle, and pieces of what looked like, I don't even want to say it. It was too awful. I wanted to throw up, but I just stood there staring at it, my brain refusing to accept what I was seeing. I took a step back, trying to clear my head, but then I noticed something else. There were tracks in the dirt, big, deep ones. Not from any animal I knew, and definitely not from any human. They were wide, almost as if something had dragged itself across the ground. And the way the dirt was disturbed, it didn't make sense. There was no way this could have come from a vehicle or anything normal. It was like the ground itself was shifting, responding to something that wasn't supposed to be here. My heart was hammering in my chest. I turned back to the truck, my mind racing, looking for something, anything, to explain what was happening. I wanted to call it in, but I couldn't bring myself to. I didn't know what to tell them. What could I say? Hey, there's blood and parts of something on my truck, and I don't know where it came from? I couldn't. I couldn't risk anyone else seeing this. I couldn't let anyone else know what I had just witnessed. I got back in my truck, slamming the door behind me, and I didn't even look back. I just drove. I didn't care about the damage, about anything. I needed to get away from that place. The road stretched out before me, empty and endless. But even with the miles between me and what happened, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just crossed into my world, and I'd been the unlucky one to see it. Story 2, I was driving near Las Vegas around 3 a.m. It had been a long stretch, and I was coming up on a lonely section of the highway, just me in the desert. There wasn't much to see, just miles of empty road and the occasional sign for some off-the-beaten-path gas station that I had no intention of stopping at. The headlights from my car sliced through the darkness, but other than that, everything felt empty, silent even. I'd been driving for about an hour, following a few black SUVs, each one about a mile apart. Their headlights were distant enough that I didn't think much of it, but close enough that they felt like a part of my drive. They had Nevada plates, single digits in order, number 1, 2, and 3. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but after a while, I figured maybe they were in some kind of convoy. I kept my distance. The way the headlights cut through the night, you could almost feel that they were watching you, but you couldn't say why. There wasn't anything special about the road I was on, just the standard stretch of highway, lined with scrub, dry grass, and the occasional lonely cactus. The odd thing, though, was that none of these SUVs ever seemed to be in a rush. They weren't speeding up or slowing down, just kind of maintaining that steady pace like they were waiting for something. The highway had no real landmarks to speak of, and I didn't think much about it until they made their move. Out of nowhere, all 3 SUVs turned off the highway, not at an exit, not at a fork in the road, just onto an empty stretch of dirt. There wasn't even a dirt road to speak of. It was just dirt. The headlights of all 3 SUVs suddenly went off at once, vanishing into the blackness, leaving only the dim light of my own car to illuminate the empty highway ahead. I had this cold, sinking feeling in my gut, like something had just changed in the air, and I didn't know what it was. I wasn't stupid enough to stop and see what they were doing. I'm not some thrill seeker, not some idiot who'd pull over and get out of the car just to find out what was going on. The fact that they turned off their lights, that was enough for me to turn the hell around. I accelerated, my eyes glued to the rearview mirror. I kept expecting one of the SUVs to show up behind me, its lights blinding in the mirror. But no, they were gone. I didn't hear anything. No tires on the gravel, no crunch of dirt under their weight. Just silence, just the road. I didn't stop driving until I hit the next town, and even then, I didn't want to look back. It felt like I was being watched the whole way, like someone was right behind me, just out of my line of sight, waiting for me to turn around. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see headlights appear, like they were following me, but there was nothing. At that point, I just needed to stop. I pulled into a small gas station with a flickering neon sign and ran inside. The clerk looked up from his phone when I walked in, but I didn't stick around. I paid for a bottle of water and left without saying much. It was like I couldn't shake the feeling of being tracked. It was that same weird feeling I had when they turned off their lights. I don't know why, but I made the mistake of asking the gas station clerk if he knew anything about the area. I guess I was hoping he could tell me it was nothing, that it was just some weird coincidence, or that people drove that route all the time. Maybe I was trying to make sense of it. He looked at me like I was out of my mind. "Don't go driving out there at night," he said, shaking his head. "That whole stretch, that's no place to be, especially at this hour." I frowned, trying to understand what he meant. "What's out there?" He leaned in close, dropping his voice to almost a whisper. "Nothing good. People go missing out there, you know? All kinds of people. Never come back." I didn't know what to say. I thought maybe he was just being paranoid, trying to scare me for some reason, but I couldn't shake the feeling that what he said wasn't just local folklore. It felt real, too real. I didn't stay around to ask more questions. I left as fast as I could and made sure to take the main highway back. But I couldn't get the image of those SUVs out of my head. The way they pulled off the road, the way they disappeared without a sound, it didn't sit right with me. It wasn't like some random car turning off the highway. These cars didn't just pull off the road, they vanished. Even now, I don't really know what I saw. It didn't feel like a normal event. It felt like I had crossed some line into a place I wasn't supposed to be, a place where things didn't follow the rules. I kept thinking about how silent everything was, the way they turned off their lights at once, like they knew I was there, like they knew exactly what I was doing. There are times I wish I had stuck around to see what they were up to. But I know better now. Some things you don't need to understand. Some things you just walk away from. And you don't ask questions. Story 3. It was late, really late. I was driving home after a long day of work, and the streets were empty. This wasn't some rural road, but it might as well have been. It was a major street lined with shops, big parking lots stretching out behind them. Most of the shops had closed by this hour, and the parking lots were mostly empty, with only a few cars scattered here and there. I knew those cars were probably just left behind by night cleaners, delivery people, or whoever else worked late. But I didn't care. I was just trying to get home. The weather was quiet, calm, too calm almost. I had the radio on, but it was mostly static. I wasn't paying much attention to it, just driving, thinking about the day and about getting to bed. Everything looked normal. You know how sometimes, even late at night, there's still that kind of energy? A quiet buzz that you can feel in the air? That wasn't there. It was dead. No cars driving by, no pedestrians, no streetlights flickering, or any of that usual late-night stuff. Just the hum of my car's engine and the occasional sound of a tire hitting a pothole. The kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. As I drove past a row of stores, something weird happened. Out of nowhere, a baseball came flying at my windshield. It slammed into the glass with a sickening thud, making the whole car lurch back a bit. It was so sudden and so loud that I almost didn't process it at first. The baseball hit the window hard enough to leave a small crack in the corner. I felt my heart slam into my chest as I jerked the wheel to the side, pulling off the road without even thinking. I was frozen for a moment, staring at the crack in my windshield, trying to make sense of what had just happened. There was no one in the street, no one in the parking lots, nothing. I looked up and down the street, thinking maybe a car had driven by, someone had thrown the ball, but there was nothing. Just empty asphalt and dark storefronts. The streetlights flickered a little, but nothing else moved. My hands were shaking. I don't know why. I've had my fair share of strange moments, especially working late shifts, but this felt different. This wasn't something explainable. This didn't feel like a prank. This felt wrong, like something was watching me. I sat there for a second, just staring at the windshield. Then I glanced around again. Still nothing. No cars, no people. Just silence. I started the car back up, still a little rattled, and eased back onto the road. The headlights illuminated the parking lots as I drove slowly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My eyes kept flicking to the empty spaces between the parked cars. I half expected to see someone standing there watching me, but there was nothing. Just more empty parking lots, more darkness. I couldn't stop glancing at the rearview mirror, checking for movement, for something, anything. I'm not a nervous driver, but I felt this pit in my stomach. It was like something was wrong with the air itself. I kept telling myself that I was being paranoid, that I just needed to get home and sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. I turned onto a side street, hoping it would feel a little safer. The street was even quieter, with more shadows stretching across the sidewalk. The buildings were old, their windows dark and empty. I felt my palms sweating as I gripped the wheel. I couldn't stop looking in my mirrors. My headlights reflected off of a store window, but I swore I saw something move in the reflection. I braked hard, my heart leaping into my throat. But when I looked back, nothing. Just the empty street, no figures, no shadows. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. I started to drive faster, trying to push through the unease. But the faster I drove, the more tense I became. My eyes kept darting to the sides, to the empty parking lots. My foot was heavy on the gas, but it was like I couldn't get away from that feeling of being watched. I was almost home now, just a few blocks away. I told myself that I was just overthinking it, that it was nothing. But as I passed another row of stores, my headlights flickered, and for a split second, I saw something in the corner of my eye. I slammed on the brakes again. I swear I saw something move. Something small and quick, darting between the cars. But when I turned my head to look, nothing. Just an empty parking lot again. I couldn't handle it anymore. I had to pull over again. My heart was racing now, pounding in my chest. I parked on the side of the road and sat there for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were white. I stared out into the night, breathing heavily. My pulse was loud in my ears. Then I heard it, a soft scratching sound, like something dragging across the pavement. It was faint, almost like it was coming from behind me. I spun around in my seat, but there was nothing. No one. No movement. The air was still again. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. I didn't even think. I just started the car and drove off again, my foot pressed hard on the accelerator. I couldn't stand being there anymore. Couldn't stay in that silence, that feeling that something was lurking just out of sight. When I turned the corner onto my street, I finally felt a little bit of relief. I was almost home. The familiar houses, the streetlights, something normal, something solid. But as I approached my house, something in my rear-view mirror caught my eye again. This time I didn't even blink. I just drove straight ahead, pulling into my driveway without looking back. I sat there in the car for a while, my hands still shaking, my mind racing. I didn't know what had just happened. I didn't know who or what was out there. But I knew one thing. That baseball, the sound it made when it hit my windshield, and the feeling of being watched, those were real. More real than anything else I'd ever experienced. I turned off the engine, but I couldn't bring myself to get out of the car. I just sat there, staring at the empty street, the dark houses. Story 4. I was on the road at 2 a.m., driving a long stretch of dirt road through rural nowhere. This route wasn't used much, mostly by folks who lived out here or the occasional truck making a delivery. The air was thick with dust, and the headlights of my rig barely cut through the gloom. I had no rush, so I kept my speed low. Too many ruts and bumps on the road to risk it. The engine hummed, and the only sound was the low creak of the truck's suspension. It was a lonely stretch of road. No cars, no signs of life for miles. And that's when I saw it. Headlights in the distance. Another truck moving slowly toward me. It wasn't all that unusual. You get the odd rig or two on these back roads. I wasn't expecting much. Just another trucker, probably heading in the opposite direction, doing the same damn thing I was. It wasn't a big road, so when you pass, you had to take it slow. As we got closer, I couldn't help but notice the truck looked identical to mine. Same model, same color. Nothing crazy, but I thought it was a little funny. You don't see many of these rigs on a rural road, and here was one rolling toward me. I honked the horn in a sort of half wave, a trucker's acknowledgement of sorts. The other truck's horn responded right back, a low, slow blast. No big deal, just a casual exchange. But when we got closer, when we were almost parallel, something hit me. A sudden feeling that I couldn't quite explain, like a knot in my gut. You get a weird feeling when you're out there alone too long, sure. But this was something else. Something wasn't right. I turned my head just a little to catch a glimpse of the driver. I always do that. Just a little glance. Hey, how's it going type of thing. Maybe I just wasn't expecting what I saw. It was me. I mean it. Me. Same hat, same red beard, same damn clothes. The guy sitting there, gripping the wheel with the same hands, looking at me with the same eyes. He wasn't even looking at me like a stranger, like someone who didn't know me. No, it was more like he was watching me. I can't explain it any other way. I froze. For a second, I thought I was imagining it. But no, the guy in the other truck wasn't just wearing what I was wearing. He wasn't just another guy who looked like me. He was me, my exact copy, same truck, same everything. And he was staring right at me, eyes wide, not blinking, just locked in place like he was waiting for something. I kept my hands on the wheel, trying not to panic. What the hell was this? A mirror? No, it wasn't a reflection. He was real. I wasn't hallucinating, at least not in the way I thought. I glanced at the road, then back at him, still locked in that stare. The trucks were still inching forward, passing each other at a crawl. I wasn't sure what to do. The moment felt like it stretched forever, the world slowing down around me. My breath was coming in quick bursts, but I kept my foot steady on the brake, trying to maintain control. Then as we were almost parallel, I thought I saw him smile. But it wasn't a friendly smile. It was more like a grin, but it wasn't a real grin. Something wrong about it. I couldn't make it out, but it felt like he wasn't just mocking me. No, it felt like he was waiting for something. I looked back at the road, trying to shake it off. What the hell was I even thinking? I was just tired, that's all. It had to be. It had to be the damn road getting to me. But no matter how hard I tried to shake it off, I kept looking back at him. And there he was, still staring, still wearing my face. His hands stayed steady on the wheel, not moving at all. It felt like I was staring into a mirror, but I wasn't. And the worst part? As we passed, we got closer, so close that I could have reached out and touched the damn truck. That's when it hit me. I had seen him move. Just for a second. He didn't just sit there. No, when I looked away and then glanced back again, his hands were raised. He was doing something. But what? I couldn't tell. I didn't want to know. I forced my eyes to stay on the road, my heartbeat hammering in my chest. I wasn't even paying attention to where I was going anymore. It didn't matter. I couldn't look back again. I couldn't risk it. But I could still feel it, like he was there, still watching, still waiting. The trucks finally passed each other, the two rigs sliding past one another on the thin strip of dirt. My mind was reeling, and I didn't want to acknowledge what just happened. I tried to focus on the road. My hands were sweating, gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles were white. I thought, maybe I was just tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. A minute passed, maybe two. I couldn't tell. But I kept my eyes forward, staring ahead as hard as I could. I couldn't shake the image of him, my exact reflection, my exact face, sitting there like nothing was wrong. But then something made my stomach drop, like ice water rushing through my veins. I saw the truck again, but not in front of me, not coming toward me. It was behind me. I glanced in my rearview mirror, my heart racing. The truck was following me. I swear to God it was. It wasn't far behind, but it was there. The same truck, the same face, the same everything. I couldn't breathe. I don't even know how I kept driving. My foot was barely on the gas. The road was still rough, but now it felt like I was crawling. Every bump, every turn, my eyes kept flicking to the rearview mirror. That truck was still behind me. I didn't even realize I was speeding until I saw the lights on the side of the road. I wasn't sure how far I'd gone, but all of a sudden I felt the tires hit pavement, smooth, solid asphalt. The truck was gone. I slowed down, almost coming to a stop, staring at the road behind me. But it was empty. No truck, no nothing. Just the stretch of dark, empty road. I can't explain it. I don't know how it happened. Story 5. I used to haul freight all over the country. Florida wasn't usually my favorite route. I don't know why, but something about it just gave me a weird feeling, especially late at night. I wasn't a guy who got nervous easy, but when you're driving through swamps and thick, dark woods, it's like the world just feels off. I've seen some things, heard some things, but I never talked about it, not until now. So there I was driving south on Interstate 75, somewhere near the Everglades. It was just past midnight, the road was empty, and the headlights of my rig barely cut through the fog. I'd been going for hours without a break, and I needed to stop. I'd seen no rest areas, no truck stops, just miles and miles of empty black roads. But I wasn't about to keep pushing my luck. I slowed down, pulled off the shoulder, and parked the truck. It was one of those moments where everything felt still, almost unnaturally still. No cars, no sound, just the hum of my engine idling in the quiet. The only light came from the truck's dim dashboard and the weak glow of the moon above. I wasn't thinking about much, just that I had to piss real bad. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air was thick with humidity, sticky and warm, and the sound of crickets filled the air. I didn't want to venture too far off the road. You know how it is. If you're a trucker, you just know when it's not a good idea to wander too far from the rig. I stood there for a minute, listening, trying to get my bearings, but the silence felt too quiet, like the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. Just as I started to relieve myself, headlights blinded me. I froze, zipped up, and turned around. A state trooper's car was pulling up behind my truck. A flash of panic shot through me. I didn't know why, but something about this guy made my stomach churn. I've been pulled over before, but this felt different. The officer stepped out, his boots crunching against the gravel, and he looked at me like he already knew something I didn't. "What the hell are you doing out here?" His voice was sharp, almost like he was expecting trouble. I shrugged, trying to shake off the unease. Had to stop for a break. Thought I could take a piss without bothering anyone. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, staring at me, his expression hard to read. I started to feel like maybe I had made a mistake. There was something off about the way he was looking at me. "Listen," he said, breaking the silence. "This is a dangerous area to be pulling off in the middle of the night. You're lucky I'm here, but I wouldn't be so quick to stop next time." I nodded, trying to keep it together. "Got it. I'll move along in a minute." He didn't seem to be in a hurry to leave, though. Instead, he walked to the front of his car, grabbed a floodlight, and flipped it on. The beam of light cut through the darkness like a knife, slicing into the blackness. I was about to ask him what the hell he was doing when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked out into the darkness, my eyes squinting. The light hit the edge of the swamp, and that's when I saw them. Dozens of eyes, yellow, cold, and glowing, reflecting back at me from the thick brush. The kind of eyes that shouldn't be looking at you. The kind of eyes that feel too still. They weren't moving, just watching. I couldn't breathe for a second. I thought maybe I was seeing things, but they didn't go away. They just sat there, watching me, waiting. "You see that?" the trooper asked, his voice low. I nodded, but I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My throat was tight. The floodlight swung slowly across the swamp, and the eyes moved with it. There were more than I could count. Dozens. No, hundreds. They were everywhere. Some of them were low, hidden in the grass, and some were high in the trees, all of them glowing that eerie, unnatural yellow. The hairs on my arms were standing up, and my heart was pounding in my chest. It wasn't like I had ever felt before. I didn't want to believe it, but everything inside me screamed that these were not just alligators. "Better get back in your truck," the officer said, his voice suddenly hard. No longer sounding like he was giving me a warning, but like he was trying to warn me about something much worse. I didn't need to be told twice. I jumped back into my rig without a second thought, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely grab the keys to start the engine. I was barely able to get the truck in gear, my foot slamming the gas pedal as the engine roared to life. But I didn't dare look back. I kept my eyes on the road, the headlights of my rig the only thing cutting through the endless dark. I could feel the sweat running down my back, my heart racing like I was running from something I couldn't see. And that was when I realized there was something in the swamp, something that shouldn't have been there. They were waiting. I wasn't sure how long I'd been driving, but when I finally passed a sign for a truck stop a few miles ahead, I pulled off. I parked under one of the lights, trying to calm myself down. But even then, I didn't feel safe. Not with what I had seen. I got out of the truck again, my legs like jelly. The trooper's car was gone. The only thing left were the sounds of the night. The crickets, the wind rustling through the trees, but no more eyes. I don't know what those things were out there, but I never stopped in that area again. Story 6, it was somewhere between 1 and 2 a.m. on a long stretch of interstate. I'd been driving for hours, just me and the road, the kind of quiet where the hum of the tires against the asphalt is the loudest sound you hear. The sky above was dark, broken only by the occasional flicker of distant stars. The forest on either side of the road was thick, almost suffocating in its silence, and the isolation felt like it was pressing in. I wasn't far from a small town, but out there, in the middle of nowhere, it felt like I could have driven forever without seeing another soul. I had the windows down, the air cool and fresh, and the faint smell of pine trees mixed with the ever-present scent of the road. There were no other cars, no lights except for the headlights of my car piercing the darkness ahead. Then it happened. I was just cruising along, barely paying attention to anything but the road, when I saw it. Out of nowhere, a blinding flash of light lit up the right rear side of my car. I'm talking bright, like a stadium light, or one of those massive floodlights they use to light up a football field. It was so sudden, so intense, that it made me flinch, even though I was behind the wheel. For a second, I thought maybe it was some sort of accident or construction zone, but there was nothing there. Just trees and more trees. No lights from any buildings, no sign of a town or a gas station or anything. It was pitch black except for that flash. It was as though someone had aimed a giant spotlight right at my car from the woods. I slammed my foot on the brake, almost swerving but catching myself before I lost control. My heart was pounding in my chest as I glanced in the rearview mirror, looking for any signs of what I just saw. But there was nothing. The road was empty. I pulled over to the shoulder, gripping the steering wheel with both hands, trying to shake off the shock. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what just happened. I knew I wasn't tired. I wasn't hallucinating. That light, it was real, too real. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, staring into the dark, waiting for something, anything, to explain what I had just seen. But it didn't come. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something was out there watching me. My nerves were frayed, and every little sound seemed amplified. The wind rustled through the trees, and the sound of my own breathing felt too loud in the car. I looked around again, my eyes scanning the darkness, but all I saw was the endless stretch of trees and the blackness of the night. I reached for the door handle, deciding to get out of the car and stretch my legs. I figured maybe a little fresh air would clear my head, but as soon as my foot hit the pavement, I froze. There was a rustling sound, not far from me, in the woods just beyond the edge of the road. I stopped in my tracks, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It wasn't the wind either. It was too deliberate, too intentional. I took a cautious step back toward the car, not daring to take my eyes off the tree line. My pulse quickened, and I felt the unmistakable, terrifying sensation of being watched. But there was nothing. No figure, no movement, just the sound, and then silence. For a long moment, I stood there, frozen, as my mind raced through every possible explanation. Maybe it was just an animal. Maybe I was hearing things. Maybe I'd just been spooked by that flash of light, and now my brain was playing tricks on me. But I knew something wasn't right. I got back in the car, locking the doors as if that would help. My hands were shaking now, and I couldn't stop glancing at the side mirror, half expecting to see something, anything, following me. The feeling of eyes on me didn't go away. It lingered, like an invisible presence just out of sight, hovering at the edges of my consciousness. I started the engine and slowly pulled back onto the road, my foot heavy on the gas pedal. The flash of light still burned in my mind, and I kept my eyes peeled, scanning the road ahead. But there was no sign of anything unusual. The road stretched on, just as empty and silent as before. I didn't stop again after that. I couldn't. The darkness seemed to close in on me, pressing against the sides of my car. I kept my eyes on the road, not wanting to look to the sides, not wanting to see what might be lurking in the trees. My hands were slick on the steering wheel, and I kept my foot firmly on the accelerator, as if driving faster would somehow make me safer. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. It only grew stronger. Eventually, I hit a small town, just a speck of light in the distance. I didn't pull over, though. I didn't feel like I could stop. Not after what I'd just seen, not after what I'd felt. I drove through the town without a second thought, barely even noticing the street lights or the quiet houses. I just wanted to get the hell out of there, away from whatever had been out in that forest. The whole rest of the trip, I couldn't shake it. The flash, the rustling, the feeling of being watched. Even as the road opened up again, even as I passed more cars, I couldn't help but feel like something had followed me. I never figured out what caused the flash. I never saw anything else after that. Story 7, I live in a small town, not far from a lake that's been around for generations. There are a few strange things people say about it, but most of them are just stories, local folklore passed down from one generation to the next. One night, though, something happened that made me question everything I thought I knew. It was me and Spencer, a friend I've known since high school. We decided to take a drive out to the lake around midnight. No real reason, just wanted to get away from the town for a bit. You know how it is when you're young and restless, looking for something that isn't the same old routine. We parked by the old wooden crosses that are set up by the shoreline. They've been there for as long as I can remember. Some people say they're memorials, others say they're a warning. But either way, it's a quiet spot, not a lot of traffic. And that night, it felt like we were the only ones around. We were just sitting there, the two of us, talking about random things, nothing serious. Spencer was always good at getting me to forget about the world for a while. The car was off, but the headlights were still on, casting long shadows across the water. It was peaceful at first, but as time went on, something felt off. You know when you start to feel like you're being watched, even when you're sure no one's around? That's what it felt like. A subtle discomfort that you can't explain. I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, maybe expecting someone to be standing there. But there was nothing, just the darkness of the woods stretching out behind us. It felt like the night was closing in on us, like we were in the middle of some forgotten part of the world, isolated from everything. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just the quiet getting to me, but that feeling didn't go away. I think Spencer felt it too, because he was a bit quieter than usual, just staring out at the water, tapping his fingers on the dashboard. We'd been there for a while, maybe an hour or so, when things started to go wrong. At first it was small, just the sound of the car's locks clicking. You know that sound when they automatically lock when you stop the engine? Except I hadn't turned the car on yet. I looked at Spencer and he looked at me. We both heard it, the faint click of the locks. Then the headlights flickered. I thought maybe the battery was dying or something, but the lights didn't just flicker. They flashed, like someone was playing with the switch. Spencer frowned, his eyes narrowing. "What the hell?" he muttered. Before I could respond, the car locks clicked again, and then the lights flickered again. It wasn't just one flicker, it was rapid, almost like someone was messing with the controls, turning them on and off without any rhythm. My heart started racing. I reached for the ignition, my fingers shaking, but I hadn't even touched it yet. I felt a lump in my throat, something cold creeping down my spine. "Spencer," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That's not you, right?" He didn't say anything at first. His eyes were wide now, his body tense. He looked at the locks, then back at me. His lips parted, but he didn't speak. He shook his head slowly. "I thought it was you," he said, his voice thick with confusion and fear. I glanced at the dashboard. The lights were still flashing, the locks still clicking on and off. The sound of them echoed in the car, sharp and unnerving. My breath caught in my throat. The air in the car felt heavy, thick, like something was pressing down on me. "Spencer," I said again, my voice breaking a little. "What the hell is going on?" He didn't answer, just stared at the locks. I felt my pulse in my temples, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to scream, to yell for help, but there was no one around for miles. The nearest house was far down the road, and this was the kind of place where people kept to themselves. Even if we could get someone's attention, it was too late for that. The lights flashed again, brighter this time, like they were almost blinding. The locks clicked louder, faster. It felt like the car was alive, like something was controlling it. I couldn't make sense of it. It was like the car was being manipulated from the inside, but there was no one else there, no one to do it. "Dude, I don't know what to do," Spencer said, his voice shaking now. He was gripping the armrest, staring at the locks like they were the only thing in the world. I reached for the keys, my hands trembling. I was about to turn the ignition, but before I could, the car let out a loud bang. The doors slammed open and shut, like someone had opened them forcefully from the outside, and the sound echoed through the night, louder than anything I had ever heard before. My heart skipped a beat. "Jesus Christ," Spencer shouted, jumping back in his seat. "What the hell was that?" I didn't know what to say. I couldn't process it. The locks kept clicking, the lights flashing, and now the car was shaking slightly, like something, or someone, was trying to get in. I could feel my stomach turn. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of everything. I wanted to get out of there, but my legs wouldn't move. It was like they were frozen to the seat, and I couldn't bring myself to move. "Turn it on, man, turn it on!" Spencer was pleading now, panic in his voice. I fumbled for the keys, my hands slick with sweat. I finally turned the ignition, and when the engine roared to life, the lights and locks immediately stopped. Everything went silent, too silent. The air felt thick again, but this time it was different. The oppressive weight was gone, and I could breathe again. But the unease, it didn't go away. Not fully. I slammed the car into drive without thinking, my foot on the gas as hard as I could push it. We tore out of there, speeding down the road away from the lake. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I was too afraid to look. We didn't speak for the entire drive back. Spencer sat there staring out the window, and I kept my eyes on the road. I couldn't get the image of the locks clicking, the lights flashing, the car shaking out of my head. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been there, something that shouldn't have been. When we finally got back to town, I parked the car in front of Spencer's house and shut the engine off. The silence was deafening. Neither of us said a word. We both just sat there, staring at the dashboard, waiting for something else to happen. But it didn't. "I'm never going back there," Spencer said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We never talked about it again. Story 8. I had never been to upstate New York before, but I had a job that took me across states, and it seemed like a good route to take in early spring. Deer season was winding down, and the roads were empty, the kind of emptiness where you can feel the isolation press down on you like a heavy weight. It was around 2 a.m., and I was just trying to push through, hoping to get to my stop before sunrise. The first thing that struck me was the sheer number of deer. They were everywhere. It was like driving through a wildlife documentary, but with way too many animals to even count. The roads were winding, cutting through dense forest on both sides, and I had to keep my eyes peeled. The headlights caught glimpses of movement, deer darting across the road, appearing and vanishing into the trees faster than I could react. It was unnerving, knowing how dangerous these things could be. But it wasn't just the deer that was making me uneasy. It was what I started to see on the road, the pieces. First, it was just one, a big buck hit by a car. Its body lay twisted and mangled in the middle of the lane, its legs spread unnaturally. That alone would have been enough to make me slow down. But as I drove past, I noticed more. A deer carcass, or at least parts of it, limbs, tufts of fur, splintered bone, were scattered across the road like some twisted puzzle. Whoever hit them didn't bother to pull over or stop. The pieces were everywhere, some half chewed up, others smushed under more tires. I winced, trying to dodge the chunks of fur and bone as I kept driving, but the road didn't get any better. It was like driving through a war zone, every turn revealing more carnage. I could feel my stomach twist every time my tires hit something soft, the sickening thud under my wheels. I tried not to think about it, but there was something about it, the endless pieces of deer, that made me uneasy. This wasn't normal. Then it got worse. I don't know when exactly it happened. I was focused on the road, trying to keep my speed in check while avoiding any more of the smashed-up animals. But I caught something out of the corner of my eye. Movement, something bigger than a deer. I glanced to the right, where the trees were thickest, and that's when I saw it. A figure, tall and vaguely humanoid, standing just outside the tree line. At first, I thought it was some guy on a hunting trip, but then I saw the way it moved. It wasn't walking. It was more like it was gliding, unnaturally smooth. And the shape didn't seem quite right, like the person was too tall, too elongated, as if they weren't supposed to be there. I felt my blood go cold as I realized something wasn't right. I slammed on the brakes, the car screeching as it skidded a bit. The headlights bounced around, illuminating the figure for just a split second. That's when I saw it clearly. It wasn't human. It had the shape of a man, but the legs, they were wrong. They bent backward, like a deer's, like it was something out of a nightmare. And its face? Well, it wasn't even a face. It was just darkness. Like a void where a face should be, a gaping hole that swallowed the light. I don't even remember what I did next. My heart was in my throat, and everything felt too quiet, like the world had gone mute. I stared at the figure for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a few seconds. Then it moved again. Faster than I could process, it darted back into the woods, disappearing so fast I couldn't even tell which direction it had gone. I don't know how I managed to keep driving after that, but I did. I had to. I couldn't stay there. Not with that thing out there, whatever it was. But it felt like I wasn't alone. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me. Every time I glanced into the rearview mirror, I swore I saw something in the distance. Always just out of sight, always just behind the trees. As I kept driving, I started to notice something else. The deer pieces. They were moving. Not like a living thing, but more like they were shifting. Like the road was rearranging itself, but I couldn't figure out how. I saw chunks of deer flesh twitching, sliding to the side as if something was dragging them away, even though there was no wind. I drove faster. My heart was racing, every instinct telling me to get out of there. But no matter how fast I went, it felt like the world around me was closing in. The forest felt thicker, darker, like it was pressing against the sides of the car. The trees were getting taller too, bending in ways they shouldn't have been able to. And the road, it seemed to stretch on forever. I wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion messing with my head or if something was really happening. But the more I looked around, the more I saw the signs. The road was changing. The deer pieces, they weren't just roadkill anymore. They were part of something larger, something watching me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it, and I was driving straight into it. Then a thud. The car lurched. I froze, holding my breath, and looked out the window. Another deer, this one had appeared out of nowhere, running full speed right into the side of my car. I felt the impact like a punch to the gut. The car swerved, but I managed to keep it steady, only to look down and realize the thing was still there, lying in the road, twitching, its legs flailing. But it wasn't dead. It couldn't be. I didn't wait. I couldn't. I slammed the gas pedal to the floor and drove as fast as I could, not caring about the speed limits or the road ahead. All I wanted was to be as far away from that place as possible. I didn't stop until I reached the next town. I don't even know how I got there. I just know that when I finally parked the car and stepped out, I could still feel the air thick with that oppressive presence. Like something had followed me. Something that had been there all along. I didn't tell anyone what happened. I couldn't. I still don't. Story 9. I grew up on a farm, and during harvest season, things never slowed down. We were running combines 24/7. I worked the night shift a lot because it was cooler, and there was less traffic on the road, especially when hauling peas to the canning factory. There's something about being out there alone. Just you and the truck, the quiet hum of the engine, and the headlights cutting through the dark. It was peaceful in a way, but sometimes the night had a way of making everything feel off. One night, it was one of those thunderstorms that rolls through out of nowhere. just a sudden downpour, with thunder crashing around like the sky was about to split open. I was driving down one of the back roads hauling a load of peas. It was probably around 2 a.m., the kind of hour where the world feels frozen in time. The kind of hour when you've been awake for so long, you start to feel like you could drive forever and not think twice about it. I remember the rain hitting the windshield hard, making it hard to see, but the road was familiar, and I'd driven it 100 times. The truck's tires splashed through the puddles, and all I could hear was the sound of rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. It was like a regular night until it wasn't. Out of nowhere, I saw something ahead. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, or maybe something I missed in the rain. But no, there it was, clear as day. A patio chair, just crossing the road, right at the edge of my headlights. It was moving, almost like it was being pushed by something, but there was no wind. It wasn't a gust, it was just moving. I slammed my foot on the brake, heart in my throat. The truck skidded slightly and I had to fight to keep it from swerving off the road. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. The chair stopped, just barely in the range of the headlights, and then, just as quickly, another one came into view. Another patio chair, this one spinning slowly, like it was rolling across the ground. Then, as if that wasn't enough, a large patio table appeared, flying through the air like it was weightless. My mind went into overdrive. What the hell was happening? Was it wind? But there was no wind. I was frozen for a second, my foot still on the brake, trying to process what I was seeing. Everything was happening too fast. The chairs and the table kept moving, the rain splattering everywhere as they slid across the road, bumping into each other. It was like I was watching something from another world, something that shouldn't be happening, and it was happening right in front of me. I had to make a decision, fast. If I didn't go, I'd be stuck there in the middle of whatever this was. So I threw the truck into reverse, trying to get some distance. But as soon as I did, I felt the truck start to shift. The tires were sinking into the road like I was driving on something soft, something that shouldn't be there. I couldn't even tell what was going on anymore. Then I heard it, the sound. It was low, almost like a growl, a deep, rumbling growl that came from behind me, from out there in the rain. My breath caught in my throat. What the hell was that? My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the dark. The lights from the truck illuminated nothing but the rain and the thick fog rolling in. I couldn't see anything in the mirror, but I felt it, like something was getting closer. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I swear to God I could feel it, whatever it was, breathing down my neck. I looked back at the chairs and the table still moving, like they were being dragged across the road by an invisible force. It made no sense. I hit the gas, hard. The truck jerked forward and I felt the weight shift, like I was being pulled in two different directions. The tires screeched against the wet road, but I didn't care. I had to get out of there. As I sped down the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The growl had stopped, but something still felt wrong. Like I wasn't just driving through a storm anymore. I was driving through something else. The air felt thicker, heavier, and as I looked in the rearview mirror again, I saw it. A figure, dark, barely visible, but unmistakable. A person, or something that looked like a person, standing by the side of the road. I couldn't tell if it was moving or if it was just the rain, but it was there, staring at me. The headlights hit it just right, and I swear to God, the eyes. Those eyes, they were wide, unnaturally wide, like they were staring straight into my soul. I couldn't look away, but I had to. My foot slammed harder on the gas, and the truck roared to life, accelerating as fast as I could get it to go. The figure stayed in my rear view, but it never got closer. It stayed there, watching. It was like it wasn't following me. It was just waiting. I don't remember how long I drove after that. My hands were still shaking on the wheel, my heart still pounding in my chest. The storm eventually cleared up, and the rain slowed to a drizzle. I didn't stop until I hit the main highway, where I finally pulled over, out of breath, out of my mind. There's no way to explain what happened that night. No wind, no explanation for the furniture moving on its own. No reason for that thing standing by the side of the road. watching me. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't natural, and I haven't gone down that back road again, not even once. I don't care if it's the fastest route, I won't go near it. Some things you just don't mess with. Story 10. We were coming up on I-80 in Nebraska in the middle of a nasty snowstorm. I was probably about 16 at the time, and my dad and I had been on the road for hours, making good time despite the weather. It was one of those trips where the road feels like it stretches forever, and all you can see is white. The snow was coming down thick and fast, piling up on the road. The truck was struggling a little with the icy conditions, but we were used to it. It wasn't the worst storm I'd ever seen, but it was enough to make us slow down. Around 1 a.m., we hit a stretch of road where it just started to feel off. The visibility dropped to almost nothing, and the truck had to crawl through the drifts. That's when we saw the cop car. The lights were flashing, cutting through the snow, and we pulled up behind it. The officer waved us over. "Highway's closed up ahead. You'll have to pull off here and wait for it to clear," he told us, his voice muffled through the snowstorm. We asked where we could stay. He pointed off to the right. "There's an old Motel 8 just off the exit. You can park there for the night." We hadn't passed anything for miles, so we didn't have a choice. We thanked him and followed the flashing lights down the off-ramp. It was the kind of place you'd normally avoid. A small, deserted motel with peeling paint, a busted sign, and the feeling that nobody had been there for years. The storm was getting worse, and we were both tired, so Dad said we'd just sleep in the truck for the night and hit the road when it was better. I remember settling in, the heater buzzing low in the background, the snow scraping against the windshield as it piled up. I had the seat reclined, and I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I kept hearing sounds, little shifts, like something brushing the side of the truck, but I figured it was just the wind. Still, the noise made me restless. At some point, I must have drifted off, but it wasn't a peaceful sleep. I kept waking up, feeling like I was being watched. It wasn't just the usual feeling you get when you're alone in an empty parking lot. It was something more, something colder. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I didn't dare look out the window, though. If I had, I think I might have seen something I wouldn't have been able to forget. The storm didn't let up, but eventually the morning light started to break through the clouds. I woke up early, stretching and yawning, feeling the heavy weight of sleep in my eyes. I looked over at Dad, who was already awake, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring out the windshield, his face pale, eyes wide. I followed his gaze. The snow had stopped falling, but there was something strange about it. There were footprints, 3 sets of them, leading up to the truck. They weren't the usual kind either. They were uneven, like the person who had made them was stumbling, dragging their feet as they walked. But what made it worse was how they circled the truck. They came from the woods a few yards away and then went all the way around the truck, pausing at the windows. They were perfectly clear, but when I looked closer, I noticed something unsettling. The tracks seemed almost deliberate, like someone had been watching us. The prints didn't belong to anyone I knew, and there was no way they'd been made overnight. They had to have been made hours ago. I turned to Dad, but he didn't look like he had any answers. He was just staring at the snow, his jaw clenched tight. His hands were gripping the steering wheel, but he wasn't moving. "Dad," I said, my voice shaky, "what the hell are those?" He didn't answer at first. When he did, it was in a voice that sounded almost far away, like he was talking to himself. "I don't know," he muttered. "I don't know." We both sat there for a while, neither of us knowing what to do. The wind had picked up again, howling through the trees, making everything feel colder than it should have. Finally, I got out of the truck, my boots crunching through the snow as I walked around the truck. The footprints were all over the place, but the thing that really got me was the way they stopped and lingered at the windows. Whoever had made them had spent time there, just standing, watching. I bent down to take a closer look, but I didn't get far. A sharp noise, like a twig snapping, came from behind me, and I spun around, heart racing. I didn't see anything at first, but the air felt thick. It was hard to breathe. I looked back at Dad, and that's when I noticed something else. He was still staring straight ahead, but his face had gone pale, and he was sweating. There was a look in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Fear. Not just the normal kind of fear, but something deeper, something more primal. It made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up all over again. "Dad?" I asked, voice shaking. "What's wrong?" He didn't answer. Instead, he jerked his head toward the woods. His eyes were wide, locked on something I couldn't see. I turned slowly, my stomach dropping. There was nothing there, just trees and snow. But then, in the distance, I saw something moving. Slowly, just out of sight, behind the tree line. It was too far to make out details, but I could feel it. I could feel eyes on me, as if something was waiting, watching, just out of reach. The silence was deafening. The only sound was the wind in the trees and the beat of my own heart pounding in my chest. "Dad, we need to go," I said, voice barely a whisper. "We need to get out of here." But he didn't respond. He just stared at the woods, his hands now trembling on the steering wheel. I don't know how long we stayed there, but it felt like an eternity. Every minute that passed felt like it was dragging me deeper into something I didn't want to understand. The footprints were still there, still circling the truck, still watching. Finally, Dad started the truck, his hands unsteady on the wheel. He didn't speak. He didn't say a word as we pulled out of the parking lot. As we drove away, I looked back at the motel. It looked just as dead and empty as before, but now it felt wrong, like something had been there, something that wasn't supposed to be. We didn't stop again until we were miles away, and even then, Dad wouldn't let me out of the truck. He just kept saying we needed to keep moving, that we couldn't stop. That was the last time we went out on the road together. I never told anyone about that night, and I never asked Dad what he saw. I think we both knew that whatever it wasn't something we could explain. Thanks for watching. Don't leave before leaving a like to this video. Also hit the subscribe button to support my work. And as always, have a horrific nightmare, my dear.